Ep005.
Broadcasting live from Toronto, Canada. This is the Youth Community Culture Podcast with your host, Olu Q.
Blessed love family, welcome back to the Youth Community Culture Podcast. I am your host, Olu Q. If this is your first time joining us, I want to say a special welcome to you. I encourage you, if you haven't gone to our site yet, check us out at oluqspeaks.com. That's www.oluqspeaks.com. Listen, we are at the end of our series entitled Inside Out, Exploring Youth Justice. It's been an incredible ride. We've heard some very powerful stories from our three guests. We began in week one with a riveting tale from a young man named Raymond Day who shared his story growing up in social housing in Toronto and the issues that he faced as a young man. So we heard from that particular side, but then we were able to go and get some more context when we interviewed Veronica Salvatierra. She is a local youth justice specialist, you want to call it. She's been in the game for about 18 years or so, and she came on the show and shared her experiences as a youth service professional. Very insightful interview and chocked full of great tidbits for anybody trying to learn more about this particular topic. And then last week we finished up with a great interview from Zia Brown. Zia Brown is the executive director and founder of Think Twice, a not-for-profit based out of Toronto that directly engages prisoners, inmates, in social programs. Very insightful interview as well. She shared another lens to us and added some more context to our discussion. So this is the recap issue. And we're here today because I wanted to take some time before you go on to kind of plug out some of the more larger pieces. I want to talk about some of the themes that I saw emerge from the interviews. And I want to really just take some time to share those pieces with you in case you haven't heard the interviews. Again, I encourage you to check them out. The response has been overwhelming. People have been calling. They've been leaving messages, they've been leaving comments, and the feedback has been extraordinary. People are actually listening, and I want to thank you for taking the time to provide feedback for us, because this is what the show is about. This entire podcast was created for people who want to engage in dialogue and to learn more information about how we can support youth and the various issues that impact their lives. So, youth professionals, educators, parents, mentors, coaches, family members, anybody with a heart for young people, this is the place for you to be, because we are trying to create a platform. We are creating a platform, not trying to. This is it. It's happening right now. Welcome to it. This is an incredible space, and the discussions so far have been really powerful. So no more long talking. We're going to jump right into it. I want to share with you my feedback from the interviews, and now, of course, I'll let you know exactly what we plan to do next week. We're going to begin a brand new series, so stick around to the end to hear what that is. It's going to be exciting. We have some guests lined up who are going to blow you away. All right, so let's go. One of the main themes that came up throughout the interviews was there was a constant attempt to form an identity, and that came up in the interview with Raymond discussing, as a young man growing up, he, kind of learned that within his community that there was a particular identity that they gravitated towards, which was the blood culture, the blood gang culture at that time in his community. And Veronica went on to describe that as neighborhoodism. That was a term that I believe was coined on our show. And I want to thank Veronica again for that one, because it nailed it home totally. And that was confirmed by Zia the following week, saying that what's happening in our streets is we are witnessing young men who are finding their identity within their own community. And that is indeed what we describe as gang culture, quote unquote gang culture. So it's important that we examine that. Is it gang culture, or is it young men who have been marginalized to the point that they have developed their own insular community, and the identity within that community borrows its values, ethics, and mores from street culture? And it's described as gang culture. So what do we do to address that? As professionals, as parents, it's important that we find ways to be able to allow spaces for our young men to create their own identity. It's important that we find a way to support our young men in connecting to the larger system, society, and finding their own identity within that context. Because if we do not, the word marginalization is just that. They're pushed into the margins. In the margins is where we find this, what we describe as antisocial behavior. It's outside of the lines. They're stepping outside of the boundaries because they're being pushed to the boundaries. So we need to find a way. And it was specifically mentioned. I asked in an interview, I asked Zia directly, are we supporting our young men in prison? And the answer was implicitly no, because there are a lack of what we describe as ethnocultural specific ways to support healing. We cannot provide big box solutions for specific problems. We must find very direct ways to support the healing of our young men. And in doing that, we have a chance to restore identity and to achieve that balance that we're not seeing right now. So we need to find a way to address identity within our young men have found their identity or are finding it within their peer circles, within their communities that are often ostracized, marginalized from the larger society, the greater society. So that's the first thing that jumped out to me in listening to the interviews. Another issue that came up constantly was, in addition to identity, but also the lack of role models, or let me say specifically positive male role models that can be trusted and relied on. Very, very, very powerful pieces here because, again, they were all mentioned by each of our guests as an important piece of what's happening in our communities. We are dealing with a lack of male role models. And anybody doing the work right now understands that right now, the OGs in the community are between 21 and 25. So imagine that. We got 21-year-old young men who can be considered OGs because they've been in the game since they were 13 years old. That's the reality right now. Who are the males in our community who are supporting and taking the time to talk to our young men? That is the challenge right now. Oftentimes what happens is that as we grow up, we become detached from the issues naturally because, life happens. We have families. And we begin to, focus on expanding our family, growing our family, and supporting our family. Not realizing that the young people who we're not talking to, who we're not addressing, who we're not supporting, are going to schools with our families. They're living in our communities. And they're searching for some guidance. I can tell you that young men, once you are able to make that connection, they really appreciate the time that you take to encourage them. And we need to find a way to create a body, a group of men that actively support our women, our single mothers who are raising these boys often, and our young men who are searching for a connection with a positive male role model. If we do not take the time and do that, we are going to continue to see what we're experiencing right now escalate. I can tell you in my years of working with young men, I can only tell you one incident, one time where I've looked at a young man who I felt did not have the ability to change. A young man who, looking into his eyes, I can see that he didn't believe that he was worthy enough to be able to change his life. And at that point was content with the life that he lived and the choices that he would continue to make in his life. The rest of them are looking for a way out of the circumstance. They are looking for a way out. And it's important that we, again, create a system, a way to be able to provide that comfort, that support, a space for dialogue with our young men. That was a takeaway from me from our interviews, looking at the issues. Now, Zia upped the ante to some degree, and she said very profoundly that the answer to addressing young men that the answer lies within our prison system. And that's mind-blowing, because one would wonder, well, how could criminals, quote-unquote criminals, be the answer to the issues that are happening on our streets and in our communities? Well, she made it very clear that in order to reach young men who are involved in the lifestyle, who are connected to what we describe as gang culture in our communities, we must engage the men, the older men who are in prison, because they are the ones who hold the respect and the power for this particular demographic, because they've been through it. And I have to agree, because I've had some great experiences where I've had the support of young men who have been inside. And when they come out, once they are ready to change, they become an essential asset to the work, because they've been there, they've done that, they have their credibility within that street culture. And they're able to say, listen, I've been there before. It's not worth it. Whatever you're trying to find, it's not worth it, because I've done it before. And look where I am right now, right back here. So that was a very important piece that I took away from the interview, because oftentimes we don't connect with our men, our young men who have been sentenced to prison, and we don't necessarily understand their value. They're kind of condemned and put away in this corner until they finish serving their time, and then they're expected to come back out and to just be good citizens because they've been rehabilitated. Well, the fact is, if we can find a way to make their life meaningful while they're inside, it can benefit both them and the young people who are outside looking for solutions. So we need to find a way to create mentorship opportunities for our young men if we are indeed trying to address the issues. And we're talking about, to be very clear, racialized populations. And to break it down further, I'm talking about the disproportionate representation of blacks and Aboriginals in our justice system. An article entitled Unequal Justice, Aboriginal and Black Inmates Disproportionately Fill Ontario Jails, written in 2013, stated that admissions of young white male offenders have gone down almost 40% since 2005. The same rates of decline have not been seen for Aboriginal and Black youth offenders. The article states that Black males made up 5% of the boys in Ontario, but 24% of male youth admitted to jail. So let's say that again. 5% of the male population in Ontario is made up of black boys. Black boys make up 5% of that population, yet represent 24% of the youth admitted to jail. While Aboriginal youth aged 12 to 17 accounted for 2.9% of the boys in the province, but accounted for 15% of the boys in jail. So what is happening? What do those numbers mean exactly? Well, to be very clear, we're dealing with systemic racism that exists within our society, within our country. And what does that mean? It means that, and this is how, let me try to explain it this way. I always try to explain it to anybody who will listen to me, but particularly I'm talking to educators, administrators, politicians. I break it down like this. Let's use an example of what would be described as a rites of passage for many young people in Canada, particularly, I guess, now under this new Trudeau administration where they're about to legalize marijuana. So this might be very timely. But essentially, you're a teenager between the age of, let's say, 14 to 16 years old, and you and your friend decide that you want to get high for the first time. You want to go smoke some marijuana. All right? You want to go get lit. You want to turn up a little bit for the first time. So you go ahead, you purchase your weed, and you go out and you go to your local schoolyard, and it's nighttime, let's say between 10, 11 o'clock, and you want to get high for the first time, and you guys are all excited about it. Now, you live in what would be described as a high-risk community, and what happens in these communities is oftentimes the presence of police is extremely high. So let's take two kids, one living, let's say, in a downtown social housing community, and one living, let's say, in Forest Hill in Toronto. And Forest Hill, for those who don't know, not from Toronto, is that'll be described as an affluent community. So two groups of young males, both doing the same thing, trying to have some fun on a Friday night. Difference is that one set is living in a community where the police don't really have a high presence in there, and they're not really in the community like that. But other young men, they're smoking, and what happens is, because the police on Friday nights tend to make their rounds on the bikes, and they're coming around, they are riding through the local schoolyard and spot these three racialized males smoking some weed on a Friday night. Now, in normal circumstances, they would probably, they have the discretion to be able to say, okay, you guys are smoking weed, kids. They would take the weed from them, maybe throw it on the ground and say, you guys go home. If I see you guys back here again, you guys are going to be in big trouble. And the kids normally be they'll be like pretty terrified, and they'll probably not do it again. Well, at that location, probably, right? But that's it. They're off with a warning. They go home. The issue is that living in these, what we just call high-risk communities, what happens is that the officers tend to use their discretion, not in a positive way, but in a way to be able to continue to probe to see what's happening. So those young men would be assumed guilty of something larger than just smoking. So for instance, hey, this simple thing now, incident becomes a charge, possession with, let's say, intent to traffic. So the other group got sent home, they got a warning, they got a stern talking to. This group of racialized young men, they're getting charged with possession if they have some weed for later on to smoke, maybe tomorrow night. It's assumed that they are indeed drug dealers, not just some kids who are getting high for the first time. So now they have a charge, and they're co-accused. So there's three young men who now have a charge on their record of possession of marijuana with intent to traffic. So on paper, they are viewed as drug dealers, not some kids who want to get high. How does that play out now? Now they're co-accused. So three friends who've grown up together, who live in the same community, who go to the same high school, who live maybe 3 or 4 doors apart from each other, are now because they've been charged with this crime, cannot be seen together, or, cannot be, if they're indeed stopped in the future, they cannot be with their co-accused. So they go to a school where there is ongoing beef with another community that resides, let's say, a kilometer or two away from them. In order to protect themselves from potential harm from the other group, because there's an ongoing beef between the communities, they have to walk home together. They have to go to school together. They go to school and come from school together. Now, they're coming home at, let's say, 5 o'clock after a long day of school. They live in a community that's over-policed. What happens? They're now stopped by the officers again, and their names are run through the system, and it pops up, oh, you're such and such. You are charged with such and such. This is your co-accused. That would be a breach of their bail conditions. And now they're charged again with breach of their conditions. So now they're again arrested, and they come back out. Now they have additional conditions. Now they have a curfew. And a curfew is, let's say, 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. But it's the end of the school year. It's June. So summertime is about to start. And the sun is, the weather is great outside, and they're sitting inside as 15-year-olds who are not able to go outside because they wanted to get high about a month ago, and now they got charged with breach because they're walking home with their friend they had to walk home with because they didn't want to get beat up by some other guy from some other community. And now they're inside their bedroom listening to people playing outside, kids skipping, basketballs playing outside, people having fun, and they're stuck inside. So they decide, I'm going to come outside for a second to hang out for a few seconds because my mom's gone right now, and I have a chance to be out there for a few seconds, just for maybe half an hour or so, kind of get some fresh air. Well, again, they live in a community that's over-policed, that the presence of police is quite high, and what happens is, of course, they're picked up again. As they come outside, they're stopped by the officers, and that's another breach. They're sent back. And that cycle continues. A lot of times you check out young men's first charges. It's simple charges. We've seen young people charged with getting into fights, just regular fist fights, and somebody's cell phone falls, is lost in the melee. And what happens? That simple charge or that simple fight now escalates into an assault or even a robbery charge. So these numbers, when we look at our blacks and aboriginals specifically in our justice system, it's important to understand the systemic issues behind that. The underlying tone of racism that is within our systems. It's important to acknowledge the fact that our young people are essentially dealing with trauma. You got to think about how many young people have been impacted. When we talk about the loss of life, every time we see somebody on television, a young man who has been gunned down, and as a community, we all stop to acknowledge the fact that it's indeed a senseless act, and we acknowledge the fact that we've lost another life so early. Think about the peers, that young man's friends who have grown up with them since elementary school, their neighbors, all of the people who that person's life has impacted, have all lost and suffered. And at 12 years old, 13 years old, and you lose a friend who you've known since you were in junior kindergarten, how do you process that? How do you address that? How do you find a way to resolve the pain that you feel inside? Our young people are suffering right now. For every life lost, there are many lives who are still dealing with the pain. The families, the friends, the communities. And the famous saying goes, what is it? Hurt people hurt people. Our young people are trying to find ways to express their frustration with what's going on out there. So we need to find a way to sit down and have discussions with them about what they've experienced. We're not listening to them right now. They have so much hurt and so much to share with us because they've gone through so much and they've witnessed, they've heard. There are things that young people are carrying around with them that they have not told an adult yet. So they're holding on to that on their own. Community gossip, the behind the scenes of what really happened to this particular person. And that's up to them to hold on to and to process. We need to be able to sit down and have dialogues with our young people in a non-judgmental, constructive manner. And when we, as professionals, sometimes it's important to put aside, I don't want to say put aside the policy, but understand that sometimes as a human being, it's important to listen without the notepad, without the case notes, without the organizational policy on your desk. Sit down and listen, because they're asking for, they need to be able to share what's happening in their lives. And very, very, very important to take the time to find a way. If it's not you, ask a family member, ask a friend, ask a professional, ask somebody to sit down with your young person and to try to connect with them in some way. Oftentimes as parents, it's very difficult because we've raised that child, and it's challenging sometimes to step back and listen objectively without judging. That's a challenge, and I get it, because we are so invested in it. But understand that we went back to Veronica's interview. She stated that there's a very precarious age that we must maintain that relationship with our young people. It's, I think, between, I think she said maybe 10 to 13, where they're going to school, hearing things, experiencing things, and oftentimes that's when they begin to start to keep information from us as parents, because they've at that point figured out what it is indeed that triggers us as parents. We have the ability to support young people and to be able to provide them with the tools to be able to overcome the adversity that they encounter. Years ago, I started in a nonprofit named Concrete Roses Youth Services, and I did that because I named it that because in high school I'd read a poem that was written by Tupac Shakur entitled "The Rose That Grew from Concrete." And when I read this poem in high school, it touched me in a particular way, because I thought about, wow, like I never thought about how I might be a rose that came from concrete, and not just myself, but all of my friends and the young men who I've known over the years and I work with. I never thought about that in that particular way, because my goodness, think about walking down the street, right? And you're just walking, you see a rose that just grew from the middle of the street in the concrete itself, just there. Now, if you're not on your phone checking like your Instagram or something, you're probably going to look up and be like, wow, that's kind of wild to see just a random rose like that growing from the concrete. But most of us will stop and marvel at it and say, wow, I wonder what that rose had to do to overcome all of the challenges. It wasn't fertile ground. It wasn't being watered every day. It had to grow through the concrete. And that's what I believe our young men are our young people growing up in our communities. These are roses that are coming from Congress. The land is not fertile. It's not prepared. It's not maintained. It's not ideal for their growth. Yet we have young people who continue to fight, who continue to overcome, who continue to demonstrate extraordinary resiliency despite the circumstances. So we want to celebrate that. And this next series is going to be about transformation. We looked at all the issues, or we discussed the issues that can impact young people. Now we're going to start to look at how people have transformed in spite of those issues. We're going to kick off our next series about transformation next week with an interview from a gentleman named Darue Ramsay. Darue is a young man who spent some time in prison, and he's been out for a few months and has done some extraordinary things in his time out. I am going to share that with you next week because it's a very powerful story. And for anybody looking to find ways to support somebody who may be in prison and to give them some advice and some encouragement, or if you have a young man or young person who may be going to prison at some point, the interview might be very helpful for you to be able to find some words or some strategies to be able to support that person through the bid and give them some hope so when they come out, they have some tangible steps that they can take to achieve. So again, tune in next week. We're going to begin our new series, Transformation, Overcoming Obstacles. And we are going to have a great set of interviews. I'm not sure yet. I'm still waiting for one confirmation, but we have some incredible people coming to share their stories of transformation and tools that they've used over the years to be able to move past the issues that they faced in their lives. All right, so listen, family, it's been a blessing. Let's continue to build. I want you to please check out our website, www.oluqspeaks.com. If you have not heard the interviews, get caught up, listen to them. They are extremely insightful and provide incredible context to our discussions about youth violence and youth justice. So it's your host, man, Oluq. Get at me on Instagram at Oluq Speaks. That's OLUQSPEAKS on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook. I'm not on the Snap yet because I just, I can't figure it out, to be honest with you. So I beg you, somebody hit me up and give me like a little tutorial on the back end because I'm not into the filter. I can't do it. So somebody, beg you, just give me a shout and help me work it out. All right? Yo, one love, family. Let's keep building. All right? Nice.